What is up, Pitt fans? Welcome to another edition of the PG Pitt Show brought to you by FanDuel. I'm Stephen Thompson. That's Abby Schnable. We just watched Pitt take down Stanford 35-20. Not the cleanest game in the world and not really the way that you would want Pitt to finish the game. But at the end of the day, they've won 5 in a row. They're 7-2. They're 5-1 in ACC play. The world is really in front of them, to be quite honest with you. We talked about this in the lead up to this week. Good teams have fallen into a trap here at Stanford Stadium, right? And it's not easy to cross a bunch of time zones and win in this stadium and win fairly convincingly. The final score wasn't what you want, but Pitt was really the only team that beat them today. Some stuff to be encouraged by. I mean, this defense continues to play lights out, but also, we're going to talk about it a little later, but the offense did struggle a bunch.
Yeah, I wrote in my column earlier this week that they didn't need to look good. They just needed to win this one because of the trap scenario. And that's exactly how it was. It was not a pretty game whatsoever, except for maybe on the defensive end, but even they had their struggles. And it just was gritty. And I think that's huge, especially as we get later and later in the season. This team has found ways to win, missing their top players, their quarterback not playing very well, being just discombobulated in general. They have found so many ways to win when they play good and when they play bad. And that's a big thing to have, especially as you're hunting for that ACC championship game.
Yep. And let's start with the good side of things. You mentioned the defensive side of the ball. Sure, they had their struggles. The first quarter was a little rough. They give up about 114 yards, I believe, and 10 points. They're trailing going into the second quarter. Fell for some big plays, let interceptions go through their hands, but man, did they really respond dominantly for the final 3 quarters.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it a bunch of different ways. You can talk about the explosive plays that like Sean Lee Jr. and Javon McIntyre and Kyle Lewis all had, but you also can look at the gritty side of the front seven. I mean, they made life miserable for Stanford's rushing attack. They held them to negative yards, tied a season high 5 sacks, or I think it is at full season, or just a regular season high, not a tie.
Yeah, I think that is a season high. I think it was tied at 4 in the third
Yes.
quarter, and then Maverick Ratio gets them over the hump in the fourth quarter in the final minutes.
But they just pressured the quarterback into mistakes, forced quick throws, and really took advantage. And honestly, yes, those flashy plays are probably going to be the ones that stick out. But the way that this defense was able to really just stay tight, make the plays that you needed to play. I mean, that stopping that fourth down early in the first quarter, I know that it didn't look great in the rest of the half, but that play really set the tone. And I think that's awesome, especially because you're still down a lot of players. I mean, Rasheem Biles is still out. Cruz Brookins, the number 1 player in the secondary, was out, and we saw how that handled. And it's just a good sign. Again, it goes back to they're finding ways to make plays. And again, kudos to Sean Lee Jr. with that first interception of his career also being a pick 6.
Yep, that was huge. I really think Sean Lee is worthy of some more playing time. I think that's something worth following up with Pat Narduzzi about this week. I mean, he really only seems to get into the game when someone's hurt, and I really think that he's deserves some more playing time than that. But yeah, Pitt was clearly the better team, especially on the defensive side of the ball today. And it was down to down, play to play. They were just simply better than Stanford. Stanford, who was out their top rusher, Micah Ford, that certainly played a role in it, but yeah, Pitt was really just the better team here, and everything that Stanford got, in non-garbage time, Pitt gave them really. So, they were finally able to get their hands on the ball, later in the game. Kyle Lewis getting a pick, welcome back after missing basically 2 games. I mean, he's just a game changer, and I remember it was maybe the second or third quarter, and he really just popped to me when he chases down like an end around I believe a wide receiver getting out to the edge, and he's the only one who can prevent a first down. But he races all the way to the sideline and makes that play. And that's just something that not a lot of guys in college football can do. And so that's when Jimmy Scott says that he is a game changer, that's what he means, right? Like he erases plays himself. And, the interception is certainly an example of that, but you can watch, you can watch some more individual plays, some less flashy plays, and Kyle Lewis shows up in that sense as well. So, Yeah, not the cleanest game in the world, but I did like the way that they were pretty consistent defensively through the final 3 quarters.
Yeah, and I also want to give a little shout out to about Cam Lindsey too. I
Yep.
mean, he complimented Kyle Lewis like perfectly. I mean, that sack, big third down sack, several tackles for loss. They just really like the duo of them. And usually we're talking about the duo of Rasheem Biles and Kyle Lewis, but Cam Lindsey has really stepped up. They just made Stanford's offense so uncomfortable. You couldn't really do anything with them specifically. If one of those guys was on you at that point, you were going down. And I thought that was really impressive to see, especially from Cam Lindsey, who is only really just getting into the groove of being a starter. I mean, he has started for the past couple of weeks, but I feel like he makes steady improvement game to game. And that's huge, especially if Rasheem Biles, I know Pat Narduzzi said maybe Notre Dame, but if injuries continue to plague this defense, that's a great option in Cam Lindsey.
I think Pat seemed pretty definitive. I think that he just didn't want to give it away quite yet, but he seemed pretty confident to me that Rasheem Biles will play against Notre Dame. The last thing I want to say about the defense is I think they adjusted kind of after that first quarter. So like Ben, I'm going to butcher his name, Ben Gulbranson, quarterback for Stanford, who was eventually benched for I think a pretty up and coming guy, Elijah Brown. But in that first quarter, Pitt was playing really how it's always played defense. They were challenging Stanford to hit throws downfield, and Stanford was hitting those throws, right? But I think for the rest of the game, they played some more zone coverage. They played, back a little bit. They gave up the underneath stuff, and basically said, for Gulbranson, a guy who's completing, I think 55% of his passes so far this year, you are going to have to beat us consistently down the field. You are going to have to make a lot of throws, and you're going to have a high completion rate in order to beat us. And that baited him into some interceptions. You leave the ball in his hands, he's going to make mistakes. Abby, let's go to the offensive side of the ball. Really, flashes of some nice stuff. Jakirian Turner was really good today, rushing for 127 yards. He had a touchdown called back, I believe, by a holding call. So, 5.8 yards per carry. They found a little bit of something in the running game, but Mason Heintschel, despite 304 yards and 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 2 fumbles, just not a great game from QB1, not a complete game from QB1. And it's not something that he's going to be able to get away with for the final 3 games of the year.
Yeah, I think we go back to talking about how when he's good, it's because he's not playing hero. And against Syracuse and against Stanford, he was playing hero. And I don't know why he felt the need to do that against the Stanford team, because after, the first quarter, they had a pretty steady lead over this team. And you would have thought that he would have really settled in and just taken advantage of all of his options. I mean, I really liked his connection with Kenny Johnson and Poppy Williams early, but then it just felt like he was almost in his head. I mean, we talk about red zone interceptions about Eli Holstein, but having 2 interceptions in the red zone, a fumble right on the goal line, and a fumble earlier, that's just not what we have seen from Mason Heintschel. And yeah, it's you can't have that against these next teams. These next teams are going to take advantage of every little thing, and Stanford didn't, which played to Pitt's benefit. But yeah, like you said, his stat line doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, just because he was playing hero and he doesn't need to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that he knows. And I think it's always obviously harder to play that out on the field than it is for me to sit up in the press box or to sit at home and watch on TV and say that. But he's still only, I think it's easy to forget, 5 games into his starting career. So you have to allow a little bit of grace and a little bit of time for him to grow. I know people were upset that he was playing even, late into the fourth quarter when Pitt had, north of a 20-point lead. I still think there's some value to getting him game experience, even if it's low stakes. I didn't necessarily had a problem with that. But like we said, Jakirian Turner was averaging 5.8 yards per carry, right? When you're up 20 points, they put the ball in Mason's hands, I think, more than they needed to in that fourth quarter, especially. So I think when you see a quarterback who's made some mistakes in this game, you can settle him down. You can give him some experience without leading him into mistakes. And I think that's one way the coaches can improve, and where maybe the play calling can improve a little bit. Because like I said, they just didn't need to be in those situations. So I think there's obviously a little bit of blame to share. I don't want to, harp on it too much after a 15-point win. But yeah, there there were just some poor decisions on both ends, on kind of all ends of the operation. And then at the end of the day, Mason Heintschel just kind of needs to hang on to the ball.
Yeah.
Like he had a fumble against Syracuse. When he runs, I think he can afford to slide a little bit more. So ball security is one thing, but I just don't want him taking these many hits in general. I will also, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
You're
but I do
good.
just also want to say that, like, I don't think the offensive line put them in great situations, right? And maybe that's where you were going.
Yep.
But in the run game early, they weren't able to move the ball consistently early in the game. That put them behind the sticks. That makes them one-dimensional. That forces you to put the ball in Mason Heintschel's hands. But then also they committed a bunch of penalties as well. Definitely cleaned it up in the second half, but O-line's got to improve too, along with the quarterback.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. I mean, Mason Heintschel got put into some unfortunate positions where he actually had to play hero in order to get them out. And I thought he did a pretty good job getting them out of those situations. And then it almost felt like some of those plays afterwards were what was the issue. And yeah, the offensive line with penalties, especially Kendall Stanley, like he just keeps getting penalties. And I know he's the backup, and maybe this is why they had Jeff Percy, the starter, in the first place. But it's almost frustrating because it's like watching him make the same mistakes every single game. And sure, they got better in the second half as a whole. The team, had way less penalties in the second half as opposed to the 7 that they had in the first half. And it just felt, again, I'm going to use the word discombobulated. And I know that they had a lot of different pieces moving in. I mean, we saw Giovanni Cooley. Ryan Coretta wasn't a starter. He's been looking pretty good. But like there still doesn't feel like that chemistry is totally hit, which is why it's almost even more impressive to me that Ja'Kyrie Turner got 127 rushing yards. He's the first player to do it for Pitt this year. No one else has gotten over 100, and it's a career high for him. And I know he shouted out the offensive line, but I can't help but think that like so many of those moments were because of his playmaking. It was with how just rough the offensive line was to see, Ja'Kyrie and sometimes Mason too, getting those he had a couple good rushes too. Like it was just impressive that they were able to do that when the offensive line wasn't playing to its best.
Yep. So you hope, part of what Narduzzi says about getting guys healthy, resting up during the bye week, and getting everyone back for Notre Dame. I think you certainly got to hope that Jeff Percy is part of that equation, because Kendall Stanley shows some good stuff, but the penalties, you just can't have them. You just can't have them moving forward, especially I think with a freshman quarterback as good as well as he has played so far this season. Abby, let's take a step back. Let's think kind of 30,000 foot view now. We've talked about it a lot, really, I think since the NC State win. But this conference is still wide open, right? Pitt is one of just a handful of teams that still only have one loss. Duke's last second win today keeps them in that camp. Miami's loss at SMU takes them really effectively out of the ACC title race, I would have to imagine. So Miami's still a good team, but now you're just you're competing with a much smaller group of teams now. We're going to see if Georgia Tech can hold on later tonight against NC State, but it just keeps getting more wide open. And if you're a Pitt team that isn't satisfied after this win, you can still kind of look at the landscape around you and say, we're still in the hunt, and we haven't played our best ball yet.
Yeah, when you really look at it, there are about 6 teams that are really in the race. Duke, SMU, Louisville, Pitt, they all have 1 loss, and then Virginia and Georgia Tech have 0. And Louisville and SMU have to play each other, will play each other later in the season, so at least one of them is going down. And Pitt doesn't totally control its own destiny, but they do have to beat Georgia Tech and Miami. And I think Miami looks easier and easier after every loss that they get. But Georgia Tech on the road is a little nerve-wracking. I'm not saying that this team can't do it, but they can't play like they did today against a Georgia Tech team that has just been, pretty dominant this year. But it's nice when you look at it that if Pitt wins out, it's going to come to tiebreaker scenarios, and Virginia and Louisville and Duke all have fairly easy schedules, especially compared to Pitt's gauntlet. And so I think if Pitt wins out, it's going to be really impressive, but unfortunately it's not a guarantee that they're going to be in that ACC championship game, despite how well they've been playing.
The flip side of that, the good news is that you don't have to win out, right? If you're Pitt, you have to win out in conference, right? But you can take a loss to Notre Dame and still, within the context of the ACC title race, be in that mix, even if you lose to Notre Dame. So you hope that they're competitive in that one, but not the end of the world, even if they aren't able to pull it out against the Irish. Coming to you from Stanford Stadium, we are going to sign off for this one. Thank you all for tuning in to another edition of the PG Pitt Show. Basketball starts on Monday. We've got plenty of preview stuff on post-gazette.com. We've got more volleyball stuff, as always, coming from Abby and Cat Flood, our honorary coworker. And so there's going to be a ton of stuff coming out. Despite the bye week, we'll have tons of basketball. We'll keep you updated on the football team as they get set for a huge, huge game at Acrisure Stadium against Notre Dame. And I could not be more excited to be there, to be quite honest. It is going to be one of the bigger games in that stadium that I can remember. So I'm excited to see what it looks like and how Pitt gets prepared. But again, thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.